I am so excited to have you join me for this critically important conversation for anyone with joint hypermobility, because bendy joints are so often accompanied by one or more chronic complex conditions. Ashok Gupta is an internationally renowned speaker, filmmaker, and health practitioner who has dedicated his life to supporting people through chronic illness and achieving their potential. Ashok suffered from ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, around 25 years ago when he was studying at Cambridge University. Through neurological research that he conducted, he managed to get himself, remarkably, 100% better. He then set up a clinic to treat others and published the well-known Neuroplasticity Limbic Retraining Recovery Program, an app known as the Gupta Program, in 2000. He has published multiple medical papers, including randomized controlled trials on long COVID, ME-CSF, and fibromyalgia, showing that the treatment is effective, and he is continually researching these conditions. Welcome back, every bendy body. This is the Bendy Bodies podcast, and I'm your host and founder, Dr. Linda Bluestein, the Hypermobility MD. This is going to be a great episode, so be sure to stick around until the very end so you don't miss any of our special hypermobility hacks. As always, this information is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for personalized medical advice. Ashok, hello, and welcome to Bendy Bodies.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for your introduction, and I'm super excited to be here with your audience.
Wonderful, wonderful. This is so important. Chronic conditions that you address through your programs, such as long COVID, mast cell activation syndrome, or MCAS, pain syndromes, Lyme disease, mold illness, fibromyalgia, ME-CSF, dysautonomia, and so many more, are so disabling and negatively affect millions of people worldwide. And they also cost the global economy trillions of dollars. So anything that we can possibly do to help people with these conditions needs to be shared as widely as possible. Can you start out by telling me what your experience of ME-CSF was like and how you discovered the treatment program that got you 100%?
Yes, so it was the mid-90s. And in those days, a lot of these conditions weren't really recognized. They were thought that they're just in the mind. And I was studying as an undergrad at Cambridge University, and I had got some kind of virus, and the virus seemed to go away, but I seemed to degrade further and further and further, to the point at which I had to crawl to the bathroom. I was just exhausted all the time. I couldn't read words on a page, which actually was very serious, because it thought, well, in my brain, is my brain just not functioning? And I was just so debilitated. It was like, I was suddenly 100 years old. And for a young man, that was just incredible. And I would go from doctor to doctor, and they would say, we don't know what to call it. We don't know what you have. There's nothing we can do for you. And you might have it for the rest of your life, which is crazy. And I'd met many other people, hundreds of other people who were suffering from it. And I remember, my dear universe, if I can just get myself 50% well or 30% well or something, I will just dedicate the rest of my life to helping people with these disorders, because it's at epidemic proportions. There's millions who suffer from it, and they don't have anywhere to go, and there's so much suffering. And so I researched brain neurology, especially the work of Professor Joseph Ledoux, and I managed to get myself 100% well, and then set up a clinic to treat others. And since then, I've published medical studies and an app and various other things, and here we are today. So that's been my journey. Like many of us, we've been through our own journeys and been able to then learn from that and hopefully share that with others. And recently, the whole concept of hypermobility has become more pronounced, because in our coach team and our coach groups, we've become aware that, yes, a lot of our clients have hypermobility. And that is definitely a risk factor for all of these types of conditions. And recently, I've discovered that I haven't been formally diagnosed, but I'm also hypermobile myself. So very interesting. It comes full circle in terms of these risk factors for these types of diseases.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. And it seems like we're going to get into this more later, but it seems like so many of these conditions do travel together, right? And we know that people can have joint hypermobility and be perfectly fine throughout their entire life, never develop chronic pain or any other problems. But it seems like sometimes that's more the exception than the rule, and that other people develop a lot of additional things, including long COVID, for example. So it's fantastic to have other things to be able to suggest to people to try, especially because we have so many side effects of medications and various different problems that we always need to consider. So in terms of like brain retraining, can you talk about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me to be able to answer that, I think what would be useful is if I can describe how the brain gets accidentally trained in these types of disorders and these types of conditions, and I can move on to then how do we
Yes.
retrain the brain out of that?
Yes, please.
So I think what's really an interesting starting point is the biggest question of all: why are we here? What is the meaning of life? So that's a beautiful conversation we can have at another time. But let's say from a scientific perspective, we are here because this body, this brain, this complex system has evolved over millions of years, from plants to single cell organisms to invertebrates, vertebrates, reptiles, mammals, human beings. And we think of our evolution as just a human being, but in fact, our DNA contains the DNA of that lineage. And not many people are aware of that. We contain 40% of the same DNA as a banana, which I find fascinating. So our system is designed to survive, to procreate, and pass on our genes to the next generation. So we are survival machines. So that gives us a clue to what causes these types of brain issues, which is that our brain cares more about our survival than it does our well-being. Yeah? And so what generally tends to happen is when we have an illness, so that could be COVID, that could be pain, that could be mold exposure. Normally, our body is able to adapt to that environment by creating an immune response, a nervous system response, deal with that threat, and come back to balance. That's the normal response. But imagine that sometimes the brain gets stuck in a response out of hyper survival, because survival matters. If we don't survive, nothing else really matters. So that's why it's such a priority. So often what happens, and let's take the example of long COVID. Somebody gets the COVID infection, and we know that 20 to 30% of patients then go on to having longer term effects, perhaps a number of weeks. But then a few percent of people go on to having long COVID, which is after 3 months, they're still suffering the effects of COVID as if they've still got the illness within them. And so there's various theories, is the infection still in the body? Is it hiding in the tissues, et cetera, et cetera? But what we believe is that the brain maladapts. So instead of going back to reset, it keeps triggering the immune system and nervous system unnecessarily as that part of that hyper survival response. And if I can use an analogy which many people find really useful. So let's imagine a fairy tale. And imagine, Linda, that you are Queen Linda of this kingdom. That has a nice ring to it. So you are Queen Linda, queen of your castle and your kingdom. And you have an army, which is your nervous system, is the electrical system that keeps your kingdom functioning. And you have a navy, which is your immune system, which protects from those external threats. Yeah. And imagine that normally an army comes over the hill to invade your kingdom, and your army and navy are brilliant at defending the kingdom and castle and keeping it safe. Now imagine there's a drought in the kingdom. Now that drought could be overworking. It could be stress, it could be anxiety. Or in this particular case, it could actually be having a bendy body. So it could be that risk factor of having hypermobility in the system, however that creates a risk factor. And then what happens is, because the system is a little weaker than normal, the army and navy are affected because we know through psychoneuroimmunology that our emotions and our state of being, whether not just emotionally, but physically, if we overtrain, for instance, that can affect us. That then means the army and navy are weaker than normal. So when the army comes over the hill to invade, it takes the army and navy a lot longer to defend the kingdom and fight off this incoming invader. And during that process, they become traumatized. So they come to their weekly meeting with you, Queen Linda, and they say, Queen Linda, we're not sure if we got rid of the infection. We think we did, but maybe the army is still hiding in the bushes or hiding in the forest. So now we need all the resources of the kingdom, because what happens if they come back? And you as the queen think, well, that makes sense. We've got to defend the kingdom. So now all the resources, the wheat, the corn, the metal, is all channeled to the army and navy to defend the kingdom. But then what happens is the kingdom is weaker because all the resources are now going to defense spending, as it were. And they keep firing off their weapons of war at the slightest provocation. So even if there's a man on a horse coming over the hill, they fire off their arrows and their cannons and everything like that. So you can see that there's over-inflammation in the system. And some of those arrows and cannons fall back into the kingdom, which then means we have the inflammatory responses in the body. We have the autoimmune effects in the body as well. And now spies can proliferate in the kingdom. So opportunistic infections, opportunistic bacteria and viruses can proliferate. So you can see we then have this altered state of being in the body, where with hypermobility being as a risk factor, we now have these extra illnesses which we're more prone to because the system is weaker than it might normally be. And this then causes this state of dysbiosis in the gut. So our gut gets affected, our mind gets affected, we feel exhausted, and we feel overinflamed, etc. And that's why there's so many crossovers between all of these different illnesses. And brain retraining, so coming to your question, brain retraining is the next time you have your weekly meeting with the generals, they come to you saying, Queen Linda, we're still in danger. And you say, my dear generals, you've done a wonderful job at defending the kingdom, but the war is over. You can stand down. Let go of firing off your weapons, and we can bring the system back to balance. And that, in a nutshell, what brain retraining is. But the generals won't believe you the first time because they're traumatized by the war. They need to be told again and again. And that is the secret of neuroplasticity, is the repetition of it. And something else to bear in mind in this hypothesis is that there's a circular pattern. So when the brain is triggering the nervous system and immune system, that causes symptoms in the physical body. Those symptoms loop back to a hypersensitive brain, where the brain thinks, oh, that fatigue could be evidence of ongoing COVID infection. Maybe we're still in danger. Let's err on the side of caution. Let's trigger the immune system and nervous system, which creates the symptoms, which loop back to a hypersensitive brain, which triggers the systems, and so on. And we get caught in a vicious cycle. And that's where we go from acute illness to chronic illness. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
That's a great explanation, because I feel like it's very challenging sometimes to have these conversations with people in a way such that they don't feel like you're dismissing their symptoms. But the brain and the body are absolutely, I don't even want to say connected, because I feel like they're one and the same in a way. I mean, we shouldn't be separating, I don't think, mental health and physical health and all of these things. It's everything that happens in the brain affects the body and vice versa, right? So I think this is a brilliant strategy. And can you tell us then what actually the Gupta program is, and who is an ideal candidate for the Gupta program?
So the Gupta program is this brain retraining neuroplasticity program. And it's designed to make a patient aware of those very subtle signals at the periphery of consciousness that are these danger signals. And we have to be very careful here, because we are not saying it's in the mind, absolutely not, but it's in the unconscious brain. It's beyond our conscious awareness. It's not the patient's fault they have any of this, of course. But we found a way that we can retrain the brain. And so we have three components of our brain retraining program, and they are delivered via an app and a website member area. So people can do it at home. And we have weekly webinars. We have the app. We have expert coaches all over the world. But Linda, the thing that's been the real game changer has been something called daily Gupta size. And what that is daily Zoom calls where patients can come on and they can have the nervous system regulation and the brain retraining. And that's been a game changer, because as we know, it is the repetition that matters. And often when we're at home by ourselves, we're demotivated, we don't feel like doing anything. But this is super easy and simple. Come on a Zoom call, we'll take care of you. And that has proved the real powerful effect in terms of getting people well from these conditions.
Is that something that they join through the app, or what does that look like? Is that a set time every day, or for the daily Gupta size? I love that word, by the way.
Yeah, it's a daily event at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern, and then 3 p.m. in UK, 4 p.m. Europe. So anywhere in the world, people can join. And it happens through the app, yes. And those are daily Zoom calls. We have about 200 to 300 people coming on a day experiencing that. And it's wonderful to heal in community as well. So often we feel isolated and alone, but if we can see hundreds of people also in our position healing each day, it's a beautiful sense of camaraderie and mutual support.
Yeah, no, I can definitely believe that. Feeling like you're alone is a really tough place to be. And like you said, we tend to, at least I did this when I was in my worst, kind of blaming myself and thinking that I was, not trying hard enough, for example. I'm sure lots of people have heard that, you just need to try harder. And that's frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in these types of conditions, there's been a lot of patient blaming in the past, because when medicine doesn't understand a condition or is not modeled appropriately to deal with it, then it can be easy to patient blame. And that's the issue with medicine, is that it's very much been based on hardware problems, not software problems. So we can have the hardware problems or the hardware aspect of it, where we can, in hypermobility, we can test the hypermobility. We can look at the connective tissue and think, these are the physical abnormalities that we are noticing. But when things are a software issue, that becomes a lot harder to diagnose and deal with. And I believe certainly in hypermobility and a number of these different conditions, it is the wiring of the nervous system, which is also affected by the hypermobility, which then in turn makes us prone to these types of diseases. And that means that it requires a different approach to traditional medicine, which is medicines or surgery, right? You can't necessarily impact the electrical system doing that. And that's where brain retraining and neuroplasticity come into their own.
And I noticed on your website, you talked about neuroimmune conditioned syndromes. Can you tell me what those are?
Yeah, so we believe that so many modern diseases, and as you say, we've mentioned a lot of them, but even things like Alzheimer's and autoimmune diseases, MS, they're ultimately down to this idea of neuroimmune condition syndrome. So neuro is the nervous system in the brain. Immune is that the immune system is involved, because we know that a lot of these illnesses involved overinflammation in the body, in the brain. Conditioned in the sense that it's a learnt response. Like, why is it that the body is, let's say in MS, is targeting the brain, and impacting the brain, or in Alzheimer's, why is that happening? Because the brain itself is learned to overstimulate this protective response. Syndrome, because there's a unique collection of symptoms that are involved in each of these different diseases. So we can't say, so we often define these diseases by the cluster of symptoms that we notice, but they all have so many crossovers that it's like the branches of a tree. You've got all these different diseases, but they share the same trunk and the same roots. And if we can get to the root causes, we can heal so many different chronic illnesses.
I like that analogy with sharing the same trunk, because I often talk about like Venn diagrams. If you talk about like mast cell activation syndrome, EDS, and POTS, for example, and you do a Venn diagram of the symptoms that you can see with those three conditions, there is a lot of overlap. But I like that visual of the shared trunk. I like that even better.
It's the same. Well, as I said, we always treat this as hypothesis. It's very difficult to prove these things, but certainly from our medical research and the neurological research, we're getting more and more to this idea that a lot of these illnesses are caused in the unconscious brain as protective responses. And because we live in an environment with more threats, so compared to a few hundred years ago, we now don't get enough sunlight. We live in boxes most of the day. We don't exercise. We often are eating food full of toxins. We're surrounded by pollution. We're more stressed. We're on screens all day. We are comparing ourselves on social media. All of these threats mean our system is constantly more stimulated than it ever was before. And that makes it more prone to then these learning effects where we learn to over survive in this dangerous environment, so as far as the brain is concerned, which then causes a lot of these diseases.
We learn to over survive. I like that.
It's because I think we think of the world as or illness as something's attacking me, something external is doing this to me. But we estimate 50 to 60% of modern illnesses that you might go to see your doctor for are actually your own internal system dysfunctional, malfunctioning, because of this overprotection, because of a more dangerous environment that we live in.
That makes a lot of sense. And just a couple of months ago, Dr. Alexandra is it Brady?
That's right.
Brady
Yes.
published a paper on your training program, and the paper is titled Neuroplasticity Intervention, Amygdala and Insula Retraining Significantly Improves Overall Health and Functioning Across Various Health Conditions. And we'll, of course, link that paper and any others that we discussed today in the show notes. What kind of results did you see, or did you see in that study, if you're familiar with enough with that to discuss it? Yeah.
Oh, yes. No, absolutely. So this was an independent audit done of our patients. So it wasn't a randomized controlled trial. But what it showed was that just after 3 months, we had, across 16 different conditions, significant responses in terms of long COVID. So as an example, long COVID, 84% improvement, after 3 months. Lyme disease, 116% improvement. Things like mold illness, 67% improvement. Chemical sensitivities, 85% improvement. And these are results that happened a few years ago, before we had the app and before we had daily Gupta size. So we think these results would be even better now. And that study was conducted, I think, on about a few hundred patients. So that was really interesting to see exactly this idea that these illnesses may feel different, but they share the same underlying cause that we can target. And we've also conducted, many other randomized controlled trials as well. But that one was really interesting because it's the first time we went beyond one illness to 16 different conditions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And there was another one on fibromyalgia that was a paper published in 2020, called Mindfulness-Based Program Plus Amygdala and Insula Retraining for the Treatment of Women with Fibromyalgia, a pilot that was a randomized controlled trial.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to read what some of the results of that were, because I thought this was really impressive. In the study they found a 37% reduction in fibro scores versus 0% in the control group, 47% increased in perceived health versus 16% in the control group, 46% reduction in pain catastrophizing versus 9% in the control group, 45% reduction in anxiety versus 15% in the control group, and lastly, for the statistics that I was looking at, 41% reduction in depression versus 6% in the control group. Those are really impressive figures. Do you want to add anything to that? And one of the questions that I have is, how durable are those effects? Because that's really amazing.
Sure. So that particular study was an 8-week study. So we're generally a 3 to 6 month program. So 8 weeks is great to get those types of results. But they also found that a follow-up at 6 months, those were maintained. There were slight differences, but they were generally maintained because people continued with the treatment in the program when they see those positive impacts. And secondly, that particular study looked at objective markers as well. So in fibromyalgia, we know there's something called BDNF, which is a brain chemical, which is elevated. And they found that in the active Gupta program group, that was also reduced back to normalized population levels, but not so in the control group. So that's one of the first times that this type of program has been tested objectively, and we can see some objective markers. And in future studies, we definitely want to include more objective markers. The challenge we have is a lot of these diseases, it's very difficult to find that smoking gun or that objective marker that we can say, this is then the reason for these conditions. But nevertheless, for us, the research is so important to make this a mainstream approach.
And that is it's really good to know that they did look at, what happened 6 months later and things like that. And I know another study that I came across was about long COVID, a long COVID randomized controlled trial. And in that one, they looked after 12 weeks and found that there was 4 times more effectiveness at reducing fatigue, 2 times more effectiveness at increasing energy, and overall a 97% increase in energy levels compared to, in that case, the control group underwent a more standard wellness program, correct? Are you able to speak to, yeah.
Yeah. So I think this was a really kind of comparing apples and apples, because each patient had a similar amount of time with a practitioner and they had a similar amount of engagement with the tools. And in the control group, they had diet, supplements, sleep, holistic living, all those kinds of good things that we know can improve these types of conditions. And to show a 400% result compared to a control group is unheard of in these types of studies. And therefore, that was great for us to, it was a small study, about 45 patients, but it showed that we can impact on these long COVID patients when not much is helping these patients. And for us now, we want to do phase 2 and phase 3 trials to finally show that long COVID can be supported and healed. And it's really important because, they estimate between 10 to 20 million people in the US are suffering from long COVID. And it's the number one cause of absenteeism. But because everyone's fed up with talking about COVID, we don't really hear about it anymore. And
Right.
yet the suffering is immense. And these patients don't really have any avenues to pursue. So can we get this out there to more and more people and relieve the suffering that they're going through?
Yeah, and that's so important. I was watching the news the other day, and they were talking about long COVID like as if it was not a real entity, like complete denial about it. It's like, wow, that was kind of a shocking thing for me to see, because I have a lot of patients that, maybe they had some symptoms before they got COVID infection, but they definitely got significantly worse after having COVID. That's very common, I think.
Oh, yes, exactly. And, that speaks to, some of the research we've done as to what is the connection between hypermobility, EDS, and then obviously these types of conditions. And perhaps we'll move on to that. But yeah, there's definitely a massive risk factor there. And therefore, they've got more of a preponderance to getting these types of conditions, especially with COVID. Because, see, COVID is one of those conditions that impacts the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, in various ways, and that's why there are so many patients who have after effects. I mean, I myself, I had COVID, and it took a couple of weeks to really kind of clear it from my system, whereas normally flus and colds can go pretty quickly for me. So there's something unusual about that illness, and we can see that if there is the risk factor of hypermobility and the associated effects in the brain and the neurology of that, how it could then mean that it has some of those lasting effects.
Yeah, and a friend of mine who's now been on the podcast twice, Dr. Jessica Eccles, she just recently published a paper on looking at long COVID and found that people with joint hypermobility, they did have a higher incidence of having long COVID as compared to the comparison group. So definitely something for this population of people to be very aware of. For sure.
And at the same time, I think what's so important with all of these conditions is not to pre-program our brain for that to happen. And so it's that real kind of delicate balancing act of being aware, but also not expecting it, and therefore being super cautious and anxious that it could happen. So I think it's one of those things that we are aware of, but we don't focus on too much as well.
Yes. I think that's a very good point. What are some of the most common myths about brain retraining?
I think the most common one is that we're saying it's in the mind. And we have to work really, really hard to help people understand the difference that, the mind versus the brain. In the mind, we're talking about our subjective conscious experience. But the brain, we're talking about an objective organ that is malfunctioning, that is beyond conscious awareness. And therefore, it's not saying it's in the mind. It's not saying that we've made it up. It's not saying that we're at fault. It's saying that this has happened in the brain, but we have figured out some techniques where we can influence that response. Yeah. And I give you an example of this, that we might think, we have no control over some aspects of our physiology. But let's say we take the example of a lemon or chocolate, whatever is the one that is most tangy for you. So imagine we place a slice of lemon on your tongue, and you don't bite into it yet, but it's super tangy, super sharp. Ooh. And then you bite into that lemon, and it tastes really sharp and sweet and sour at the same time. And it's just really juicy, and the saliva's flowing in your mouth. What an experience. Now, I don't know if you've got excessive saliva in your mouth now as a result of just... But most people do, if we kind of do that. And isn't that fascinating that something isn't real, and you can't ordinarily stimulate this physiological response, your saliva glands. But just through that power of imagination, we're able to trigger a physiological response. So do you see, that's an example of something that's beyond our conscious control, but actually we can find little tricks, little ways that we can influence it. In a similar way, we've discovered ways that we can influence our immune system responses and calm them down and bring the brain and body back to safety. So that's a common myth that people have. And I think another common myth is somehow we're beyond help because a doctor has physically diagnosed something in our bodies, therefore brain retraining isn't going to work. But that's that reductionist model that we have in medicine that, different things are disconnected in our bodies, but we are one system, one holistic system. So of course, if one system is over-responding, it will have domino effect on the rest of our body, including our physiology and physical things we can measure. So just because we have a physical diagnosis of something or something's clearly out of whack, that is often a downstream effect of this underlying cause, and helping people understand that is super important.
Okay. I really like how you explain things. I feel like it's just so your comparisons or your analogies are really rich and really help people to understand what they can potentially do to help themselves if they're suffering from a chronic condition. And especially a lot of people will have been to multiple different doctors and kind of feel like they're running out of options. And so I think it's really valuable for them to realize that there are potentially more things that they can try. Some of the questions that I got from some of my followers, one of them was, how much time do you need to dedicate to the program in order to see results?
It's a common question that we have. And I think in modern medicine, we're very used to this idea that we go and see a doctor for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. They give us a pill. We take that pill and hopefully we're going to be fine. And the issue with this type of work is that when you're retraining the software, not the hardware, that does require inevitably some investment of time, but it's so worth it. It's not wasted time because you're helping calm your whole nervous system, and that helps you feel happier and calmer. So there is a bit of investment in time. So we recommend at least 20 to 30 minutes a day, and that's in one sitting, and then short little exercises throughout the day. But it's perfectly manageable in terms of fitting into someone's lifestyle. And of course, like anything, the more investment you put into it, the better the benefits you're going to get. Like going to the gym, you go to the gym once a week for like 20 minutes, that's not going to have the effect of going a few times a week and investing that time and energy. And so it is with our brains as well, that repetition and consistency is important, which is why the daily Gupta size has proved so powerful, because that regularity and that motivation to come on every day is super useful.
And are there different ways that people can engage with the program? And you mentioned the Gupta size, but are there other things that, I guess, if I were to sign up today, what would that look like? And can you go into a little bit more detail about some of the different interactions with the app, for example?
Sure. So for some people, they're quite self-directed. So we have videos and audios that they can watch and listen to and integrate the program into their lives. And then we also have weekly webinars with myself. So if people need that guidance, tuning in each week enables them to understand the tools at a deeper level and be supported and do it over a 3-month period. We also have one-on-one sessions with coaches. So we have 20 to 30 coaches around the world who can do one-on-one sessions with patients who need that more personal touch. And of course, then we have the daily Gupta size support, which are these daily sessions. So there's so much support that people can get and interact with the program in the way that suits them. But really, the app is the fundamental core of it. So working through the videos, understanding the tools and techniques, and then listening to them. And part of this is also the somatic work. So we integrate a lot of somatic retraining into our program, which is retraining the brain out of these resistances to how the body is feeling. And once again, in hypermobility, we'll believe that there is more interoception. So the brain is more hyper aware of what the body is doing because of the hypermobility. And because of that, there can be hypervigilance. And some of those systems in the brain then feel the body is more vulnerable to perhaps a fall or perhaps overbending or overstretching in some way. And therefore, there's more excessive information going into the brain and is being processed for danger. And that is also about retraining ourselves, feeling more safe in our physical body, feeling more safe around anxiety. And, we do a lot of work on the amygdala and insula, which is the two brain structures we believe are being retrained in this type of approach. And we know that people with hypermobility have larger amygdalas and more processing of negative events in the amygdala, which once again supports this hypothesis that actually this excessive anxiety, excessive interoception and focus on the body may then fuel these types of conditioning of events in the brain, which causes these chronic illnesses.
Yeah, that definitely fits with my clinical experience and my personal experience as someone who's hypermobile and has struggled with various different things over the years, but doing well now, but definitely have had chronic pain in the past and that kind of thing. In terms of how clinicians can recommend brain retraining to their patients, do you have a suggestion for how we can do that in a way that is least likely to sound like gaslighting?
Yes, no, very good question. And we work now, we have about 5,000 practitioners around the world, especially in the US, who are now recommending the program to their patients. And we find the best way here is to be very clear that we're not saying it's in the mind, but that it's in the brain. And the brain is triggering the immune system and nervous system, which is contributing to the symptoms. And an example would be when we have flu, we might think, oh, look at this horrible flu virus, this influenza virus. Look at what it's doing to my body. It's making me feel sick. But the flu virus isn't the thing that's doing that. It's our own immune response to fight off the flu virus, which causes the symptoms. Right? And in a similar way, could it be that our own immune system is triggering, overstimulated, causing these symptoms? And when people understand that concept, then it becomes easier to help them realize, okay, it's not something psychological. It's not in my mind. My brain is over defending me, and that now, makes more sense.
And that turns out to become part of the problem. So if we just keep addressing the hardware issues and we're not addressing the software issues, we're just not going to get as good results.
Exactly. And what who's throwing these people into the river in the first place? And to do that, we need to get away from the hardware paradigm and walk further upstream to understand the software issue, which is, why are these people falling into the river? What's going on? Okay, the nervous system is primed to over-defend itself and get into these conditioned responses. Right, now that we understand that, we can now retrain that and calm the whole nervous system down and get the system back to balance. So that's the way we need to look at these. And we're not dogmatic. We don't say, only deal with the brain. It's perfectly possible, with as many of our practitioners do and many nutritionists and functional medicine doctors, is integrating it as part of an overall protocol. So yes, we do the medications, the supplements, the binders, etc. But let's also have this brain retraining component in there. And many patients find that or clinicians find when they do that, it magnifies the positive impact of their existing protocols. And I don't know if you notice this, Linda, but many practitioners notice that when the nervous system is calmer and a person's in a better place physically, emotionally, the medications are then more effective because the person isn't reacting to the medications, and the medications do the work that they need to.
I would totally agree with that. And are there people who are not good candidates for the program?
Good question. I think if somebody is very tied to the pure reductionist medical model, where it's like, look, my cells are not functioning correctly and I've got to fix that, right, through medications. And the only way is through medications. If that's very much their belief system, then of course it's difficult for them to embrace this whole new way of doing it. So we work a lot on helping people understand the hypothesis and really suspend their disbelief, if they can, to really go for it. You have to really believe in this approach for it to work. I think that's important. And then, as we mentioned, secondly, being able to have the both and approach with, yes, I have physical symptoms in my body and they're being caused by an upstream response. I think if someone has got severe anxiety and depression, it can be a little tricky. So they can just focus on the first bits of our program of regulating the nervous system before they're ready to retrain their brain.
And actually,
finally, I was just thinking something to add. If somebody, we treat a lot of people with mold and Lyme and those types of conditions. And once again, if we are believing, look, X plus Y equals Z, I have mold around me, that's causing my illness. If you believe that purely at 100%, it's some reframing that is useful. So what we say to patients is, yes, absolutely. At some point in your life, you were exposed 100% to mold, which created 100% protective response, which is this allergic response. But now your brain, if there's 5% mold or 10% mold present, is creating 100% response. So there's what we call differential activation in the brain. The brain is now hyper defending against small amounts of something. And that's the same with food allergies. Now, why is it that one day we can eat all foods and a year later, suddenly we're having a microscopic amount of it and our brain is over-responding? It's because, once again, the brain has learned to overprotect. Even peanut allergies, all these different allergies are essentially our brain over-defending and over-protecting us to keep us safe. And therefore, if someone has got that pure medical model, this thing is causing my illness, then some work has to be done on reframing that.
Okay. And that leads me to another question about the duration of the program. Do some people do it for, 4 months, 6 months, and other people continue on for a year or longer?
We call our program a minimum 6-month program. And why do we say that? Like, many people do heal and recover within months, within weeks. Others, it takes longer. It can take a year. And this is because it's an art, not a science. Each of us are individuals. Our brains are individual. Our physiology is individual. The illness we got is individual. And therefore, it's very difficult to put a timeline on it. But what we do know is a minimum 6 months is that commitment and motivation to keep going. And because some people get results or only see the first improvements after 5 or 6 months. And yes, there are other people who are on our program for over a year, because what happens is they heal, but then they have to use the program to keep their stress levels under control. Because if you heal and then you're put back into stressful environments, the system will over-respond again. So therefore, our third R of the program. So we have relaxing the nervous system, retraining the brain. Third one is re-engaging with joy. So learning to understand our stress triggers and re-engage with joy is an important part of healing.
And has there been some people that actually got worse while they were doing the program? And if so, what happens then?
Of course, there's a small, like with any condition or any medication, there's always a small percentage of people who start feeling a little worse. And often this is because the attitude to which you take to the program is supremely important. We notice in these conditions, there tends to be more of a preponderance towards overachieving, conscientiousness, wanting to do a good job. So sometimes people grab our program and go, right, I'm going to do this 100% and do it fully and do it every day. And they push themselves too hard rather than taking it in a very light way. So that can be one way in which people can get overstressed because they're doing something new and really wanting it to work. And that isn't going to help. And secondly, sometimes with meditation and breathing, if we've got unresolved emotions within us from our childhood, from past traumas, when we meditate and breathe, suddenly those emotions can come to the surface and be very difficult to deal with, which can make us feel worse in the short term. But once again, with help and support with our practitioners and shifting our approach, people can calm down those initial responses and then get positive results.
Okay. And did I miss any questions or did you have any final thoughts?
I think the hope that I want to give to people is that healing and recovery is possible. And no matter the diagnoses that you've had, even hypermobility or whatever it may be, your genes are not your destiny. Health and wellness is your birthright. And this is a whole new area of medicine, a whole new paradigm for medicine. And I think it's just as important as traditional medicine. So therefore, never give up hope that you can heal and recover from your condition. And don't buy into this pure medical model that there's something that we've detected that's wrong in your body. Therefore, until we correct that, you cannot get well. No, get upstream. Realize that the brain is the most powerful organ of your body. And when that is operating correctly and coordinating the body correctly, healing is possible. Just like a conductor, right? We can hear a song, and let's say there's an orchestra playing a song. If there are some instruments that are out of tune, or aren't playing at the right rhythm, then it sounds awful. And we think, right, we've got to go to that musician and we've got to tell him, look, don't do this, don't do that, you'll do this. But actually it's the conductor. If you go upstream to the conductor, if that conductor is conducting the orchestra correctly and they're all in sync and all in tune, it's like our whole bodies are now in harmony and therefore the music sounds really beautiful. So in a similar way, let's not focus on the individual instrument. Let's focus on the conductor and then we can be in health.
I love that. So I love that analogy so much because I feel like oftentimes people feel like I have this wrong with my neurologic system. I have this wrong with my immunologic system. I have this wrong with my musculoskeletal. And, and they feel like they're playing whack-a-mole, like they just have to keep knocking out each of these individual things. Whereas if you go upstream to the conductor, it's like, for me personally, my health is so much better than it used to be, even though I'm a decade older. I can do more than I could a decade ago. And, but most of the things that I had going on in my body, it's not like they've gone away. I've just learned to manage with them in a different capacity. So.
Yeah. And I think your analogy of whack-a-mole, I love your analogy there. Whack-a-mole is absolutely what's happening in modern medicine and even in functional medicine. So what's happened is the mainstream medical model hasn't been working for these types of conditions. So people are going to more alternative and complementary and functional medicine. But often, inadvertently, those models are also being reductionist in terms of, right, we've done these tests on the enzymes, we've done this test on this particular a vitamin and it's low, and that's the cause of your condition. And until we fix that, you cannot get well. Not realizing, actually, you want to go once again, always go upstream, always go upstream. Why is the body in this dysfunctional state or lack of homeostasis? If we can get to the root causes, then a lot of these downstream, more kind of reductionist effects will naturally resolve themselves. And that's the hope of neuroplasticity.
And neuroplasticity is such a beautiful thing. And didn't we used to think that this was only like for children, that only children could actually change their brains, but now we know that we can do it all throughout our lives.
Yes, that's exactly right. So we used to think the brain's pretty fixed once we get to our late teenage years, but we realize now our brain is constantly rewiring itself. And not only that, we should be encouraging it to rewire itself, because that keeps the brain supple and flexible, and learning new things is super important. Therefore, if we can harness the power of the brain and find the right key to the right lock to retrain it, we can heal potentially so many different illnesses. I mean, we have people with MS and Alzheimer's now coming to us and healing, and this is incredible. So that is the hope for this type of approach.
That's amazing. Pain, to me, pain catastrophizing. When I learned about that, and when I was an anesthesiologist, I'd been working, in the operating room for over 20 years, but I was suffering from my own chronic pain. And when I learned about pain catastrophizing, I realized if I can change what I'm doing inside my mind, that may help change how my body feels. And I felt like that was a really helpful thing to understand. And I know something that you study.
Yeah, absolutely. So we treat a lot of people with pain and fibromyalgia, and it's really understanding that pain itself is not objective, in the sense that pain is a subjective signal, a subjective experience in the brain. Yeah. And therefore, it's a warning signal. So I remember when I was younger, I used to play football a lot. And, I would play football and I would fall on the floor and scrape my elbows, but I was so excited in the game, I would continue with the game. And only after the game, I'd realized that I'd scraped my elbow and it was bleeding. And suddenly a rush of pain came to my brain. And I thought, it was so interesting. How did I not notice the pain during that entire time? Right? And so it is with our pain networks, that they will send signals when they believe that we're in danger. But if we're fully enjoying something and happy, those danger signals don't get through, because the brain thinks, well, how can this person be happy and joyful? And can there actually be something wrong at the same time? Now, of course, we've got to be very careful, because pain signals are also very important to indicate when something is wrong at an acute level. The issue is when acute pain becomes chronic pain. That's where the pain networks themselves are now overstimulated, over-defending, creating too many pain signals, because guess what? Our brain is a survival machine. It always prioritizes survival. Our brain has a negative bias. It doesn't care about whether you're happy. That's why often anxiety and depression are things that we see so much of in the population, because the brain itself is wired for defense and survival. Therefore, it will err on the side of caution. If you have 99 compliments and one criticism, what is your brain going to remember? Why is that? It will remember the one criticism. Now, why is that? Because it's hardwired to defend us and protect us. And that's the secret to these different conditions.
And that makes me feel a little bit better, because I feel like I definitely do that, but that's a hardwiring thing, or that's something that is, it's not, I shouldn't feel guilty about that, because I definitely have noticed that about myself.
Oh, yeah. No, look, I think most people in the population, that's exactly what they experience. There's a negative bias in the brain towards things that hurt, because, and it's also to do with our own experiences. All of us, to some level, are on a scale of self-love and self-esteem. And so what happens is, whether it's 0 to 100%, anywhere along that scale, if someone criticizes us or puts us down, or something doesn't happen, immediately it triggers unresolved pain from our past, or unresolved criticism from our past that we experienced, that then feels anxious, provoking, depressive feelings will come. It's a grief as well about the sudden loss of the state that we had before and the sudden new state. Therefore, this negative bias is endemic in the population. Is very, very normal.
Okay. And what would be a hypermobility hack that you could share with the listeners? I like to end every episode with a hypermobility hack.
Make friends with your body. realize that when you are hypermobile, there is no, don't look at it as a bad thing or a good thing. It is just an attribute. And actually, people who have more bendy bodies, they also tend to be more sensitive, more empathic with the world around them. And therefore, it's a gift. And when we make friends with our body and the way that it is, and we use some of these brain retraining techniques, we actually get closer to our bodies and no longer see it as this annoying thing that we're trying to heal, or there's something wrong with my body. Always see your body as doing the best it can, and that it actually is healthy. It's just that it's overprotecting. And when you do it in that way, then your whole perspective on your body shifts, and you get into more of a frame set and a mindset of I am healthy, I am healing.
Okay. And where can people find more about you and your programs online? And also please include any social media accounts. Like I think you have a Facebook page. So if you could let us know where we should be looking for you.
Yeah, so the starting point, really, I'd love for people to experience a lot of what we're doing through our free trial. So we have a 28-day free trial where people can download our free app or go to our website. So you go to guptaprogram.com, which is GUPTA, guptaprogram.com. And on our website, you can take the free trial. You can also see our success stories and our research that we've done. And you can go to App Store or Play Store, type in Gupta Program Brain Retraining, and then there you can also download the free app. I'd love for people to see the free videos we've got. We've got hours and hours of free videos, audios, and even some of the daily Gupta sizes free as well. And then if people decide they want to become a premium member, they can take a membership, 1-year membership, which gives them access to all of the content within the program, in the app and the website. And they also get the daily Gupta size. And until we have larger scale phase 3 trials, we offer a 1-year money back guarantee on the program. So people have got nothing to lose by using the program. If it doesn't work, no questions asked, you can return it, get your money back, and use that money for another treatment. So until we get phase 3 trials, that's the way that we are working with the treatment. And we can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Our handle is Gupta Program. Very simple to remember. So there you can see a lot of our success stories. So people are finding, especially on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, our channels, which are all Gupta Program, just watching the success stories of people really inspires us to recognize that we can heal when you hear from real people and real stories.
Yeah, that's amazing that you offer a free 28-day trial, but then also your money back guarantee within that first year. That's really incredible. So people really can try this in a way that is, for lack of a better word, like it's a really safe investment, I guess is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, so our program is priced at $400 for a year subscription, right? So it's on average about $1 a day. And for that $1 a day, you're getting 15 hours of videos, about 30 to 40 audio exercises, brain retraining exercises. You're getting access to a community. But most importantly, you're getting the daily Gupta size. So every day you're getting sessions. I mean, we pay $10, $20, $30 for a yoga class, for instance. But here you're getting nervous system regulation and brain retraining every day included in that $1 a day. So for us, it's incredible value, and we keep it at a low level because many people have been through chronic illness for years and they haven't worked and they spend so much money. So we try to keep the cost of it something that's appropriate for most people and reasonable.
And that leads me to a follow-up question, which I should have thought to ask earlier. Is there a certain period of time after which, if someone's had chronic illness for 10 years or something, or 20 years or 30 years, after which this kind of program is not very likely to be successful? Or have you seen success even in people who've been ill for a really long time?
Yeah, this is where we get entrenched in illness and we become identified with our illness if we've had it 5, 10, 20 years. And the great thing about neuroplasticity is that our brains are always neuroplastic. So people in their 70s and 80s can learn to dance and rewire their brain. Right? And it reminds me of one person, a case study I remember, a guy in New Zealand. He was in 82. He had fibromyalgia, pain, Lyme for like 30 years. And he was like, look, I'm going to try your program. And he did our program and he got 80 to 90% well, right?
Wow.
And I said, what are you going to do with your life now? I mean, obviously, when you're 82, 83, I mean, there's only so much energy that you're going to have. But he was like, well, I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to do all the things I've always wanted to do in life. I thought, wow, if a person in his early 80s can heal and rewire his brain, we can all do it. Yeah, our brains have that capacity, and that is the promise of this.
Yeah, that's really, really amazing. And I often try to help people find scams. And, if I often say, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But here we're talking about something that requires a certain amount of effort and everything on your part. This is not something where, it's just a wave this magic wand and everything's going to be better and you take this magic pill. Or it really does seem like an absolutely incredible way for people to improve their health in a way that is, again, addressing those root problems and more sustained and giving them tools that they can use throughout the rest of their life.
Yeah, that is the thing about this, is that we don't want people to become complacent. So once they heal, we encourage people to use these tools and techniques for the rest of their life to keep their nervous system calm. And that is the idea of holistic living, that we get ill. It's not a sickness industry where we get ill, take a pill, right, we're back to normal. This is an investment in our mental, physical, and emotional health. And dare I say it's spiritual health as well, because within our program, whatever our belief systems are, whether we're religious, spiritual, atheist, actually connecting with our spiritual nature, our representation of love, a higher power, all of these things can be very useful in being able to make us feel safe in a crazy world.
Yeah, most definitely. And with that fee that you mentioned, so somebody could do that for a year. Could they do it for a year and a half? Could they do it for 2 years? Or do they have to pay for like the second year, for example?
Yeah, so it's a 1-year subscription. So after a year, there would then be a renewal fee for the following year. But each, included within that, they get 3 webinar series, they get the daily Gupta size and access to all the content and community. So that's how it works.
Okay. Well, that's amazing. And that's I feel like that is a pretty minimal fee for the incredible amount of things that you get. And given how much people are already incurring for cost for their health. And if you can, avoid a copay for a surgery or something like that, it's probably going to be, especially if it's deductible, it's going to be a lot more than that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, this is essentially often the price of one consultation with an expert will be $300 to $400. So you're getting that, and you're getting an entire year of support through this with clinical evidence. But I mean, you're always persuading me to charge more now for it. But that is the point, is we've kept it low because we know people don't have a lot of funds, and we just want to focus on getting people well. That's it.
You're trying to make it as accessible as possible, which is great. And especially, again, I want to point out about the 28-day free trial and the 1 year, because there's probably some people that are thinking, I know that's why I make the podcast free, because I want it to be accessible to everyone. And I know that not everyone can afford, for example, to come see me one-on-one. But again, you have the 1 year money back guarantee. So even if people are saying, gosh, I don't know if I can even afford that, it's like, well, if you can figure out how to actually pay for the program, and if it doesn't work, then you can ask for your money back. I mean, that's an amazing thing that you offer.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, you have been listening to the Bendy Bodies with the Hypermobility MD podcast, and your guest today was Ashok Gupta. Thank you so very much for coming on the Bendy Bodies podcast today and sharing your vast knowledge and wisdom with the audience. I think a lot of people are really going to benefit from this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Bendy Bodies with the Hypermobility MD podcast. Visit our new website at bendybodiespodcast.com, where you can now view guest profiles and show notes with links to products and journal articles. Leave me a comment, sign up for updates, leave a review or a voicemail, and access the podcast on your favorite player, all directly from our website. You may hear your voicemail in a future episode where we answer your question or dive into your gracious feedback. Follow us on Instagram at bendy_bodies. We love seeing your posts and stories, so be a buddy and engage our community by using the hashtag BendyBuddy. That's hashtag BendyBuddy. You can also find me, Dr. Linda Bluestein, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn at HypermobilityMD. Visit hypermobilitymd.com for information about medical services and one-on-one coaching. This podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. Do not disregard or delay obtaining medical advice for any medical condition you have. Opinions shared are that of the guest and do not necessarily represent the views of the host or any particular organization. Sponsorship of the podcast does not necessarily mean an endorsement. Thank you for being a part of our community, and we'll catch you next time on the Bendy Bodies podcast.